Hi, this is all the chapters of history. Have you heard the land of the morning come? This expression refers to Korea. Today, Korea is creating attractive culture based on their unique identity, such as K-pop, K-drama, and K-film.
Respect!
Then how much do you know about Korean history? Let's begin all the chapters of Korea history. The first nation in Korea was Gojoseon, which was established during the Bronze Age. In Korea, it is said that the founding year of Gojoseon was 2333 BC, but this is only a myth-based number, and in reality, we don't know the exact time of its founding. The founder of Gojoseon was Dangun. In Korean mythology, Dangun's father, Hwanung, was the son of God, and Dangun's mother was a bear who turned into a human. A bear who wanted to become a human became a woman after eating only mugwort and garlic for 100 days. Then she became Hwanung's wife. This myth is interpreted that a foreign group with an advanced civilization led by Hwanung founded Gojoseon in association with a local tribe which worshipped bears as totems. And the foreign group led by Hwanung is speculated to be a northern ethnic group that came down from Siberia. Dangun was both a king and a priest, according to Siberian tradition. Gojoseon, which stretched from southern Manchuria to the northern part of the Korean peninsula, was a tribal union state. The starting point of Gojoseon is now considered to be near Liao River in China. Now Manchuria is China's territory, but it was only recently incorporated into China, and historically, Manchuria had been a separate space from the Chinese world. The Hongshan civilization founded near Liao River is culturally completely different from the civilization of mainland China, but rather has a cultural similarity to Gojoseon and Goguryeo that will emerge later. In the mid to late period of Gojoseon, Wiman led a group of more than 10,000 people to seek asylum in Gojoseon to escape its chaos in China, and King Jun of Gojoseon accepted Wiman's exile group by giving land to Wiman on the western outskirts. Gojoseon was still staying in the Bronze Age, but Wiman had iron. Wiman thought that he could become the king of Gojoseon if he uses the iron he brought, so in 194 BC, Wiman drove out King Jun and became king himself. King Jun, who was expelled, moved to the southern part of the Korean peninsula and spread the advanced culture of the north to the southern part of the Korean peninsula. As Wiman became the new king of Gojoseon, Korean history also entered the Iron Age. Although Wiman was Chinese, he maintained the tradition of Gojoseon. In 108 BC, Han Wuje, the conqueror of the Han dynasty of China, destroyed Gojoseon. Even the Han dynasty destroyed Gojoseon, as Gojoseon was completely different culture from the world of China. Han dynasty did not directly control the old Gojoseon land, but established 4 commanderies of Han and ruled indirectly. 4 commanderies of Han consisted of Hyeongdo, Nangrang, Imdun, and Jinbon. Except for Nangrang County, which was located currently in the central part of Korea, the other 3 counties were extinguished early due to opposition from local Koreans. After the fall of Gojoseon, numerous tribal nations from Manchuria to the southern part of Korea were established. The period from the fall of Gojoseon to the 3 kingdoms of Korea is called the Proto-Three Kingdoms period. The Proto-Three Kingdoms period, where several tribal nations were scattered, was finally organized into 3 countries, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. From this point on, the 3 kingdoms period began. Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla also started out as tribal nations. And then they gradually developed and centralized the country and became an ancient country that wielded a powerful royal authority. Goguryeo was founded by Jumong, who came from Buyeo, the northernmost tribal union nation, along with indigenous forces in Joseon. Goguryeo was direct descendant of Gojoseon. Before long, Goguryeo moved its capital to a Gungne fortress located in the northern region of the Yalu River. Baekje was a country founded by Goguryeo immigrant forces who moved south to what is now Seoul, cooperating with the indigenous forces in the Han River Basin. The founder of Baekje was Onjo, the adopted son of Jumong. Onjo founded Baekje with his mother Sosanho. Shilla was a country founded by unknown foreign forces in cooperation with indigenous forces in Gyeongju, a city in southeastern Korea. The founder of Shilla was Park Hyokgose, who supposedly was a shaman. Unlike Goguryeo and Baekje, Shilla did not use the title of king, and Shilla called their leader a word for priest. In Shilla, in the early days, the three surnames of Park, Seok, and Kim took turns to become king, and later Kim inherited the throne. Located in the west of Korea, Baekje was the latest of the three countries to be founded, but Baekje reached its heyday first among three countries in 4th century based on its fertile land and its abundant economic power from the plains in Seoul. The monarch who led Baekje's heyday in 4th century was King Geunchogo, the 13th king, who expanded his territory to the southern part of the Korean peninsula and made Gaya a country that remained only a tribal union nation between Baekje and Shilla in the south of Korea, a vassal state of Baekje. To the north, King Geunchogo fought against Goguryeo, and the king of Goguryeo died in the Battle of Pyongyang Castle. King Geunchogo first started exchanges with Japan and spread advanced culture to Japan. Baekje and Japan remained allies until the fall of Baekje. A relic that symbolizes the friendly relationship between Baekje and Japan is the seven-branched sword, which Baekje bestowed to Japan. Nowadays, Japan is claiming Baekje dedicated the seven-branched sword. But historically, sword was considered to bestow for senior to a junior. And if you look at the spread of ancient East Asian culture, it is true that Baekje was a country like a Japanese elder brother. Goguryeo in the north grew up fighting Baekje in the south and China in the northwest with the strong spirit. Following Baekje in the 4th century, Goguryeo achieved its heyday in the 5th century. The kings who led Goguryeu's heyday in the 5th century were the 19th king Gwanggaeto the Great and his son, the 20th king Jangsu. Gwanggaeto the Great is one of the most respected kings in Korea and is a representative conquest monarch in Korean history. Gwanggaeto the Great took all of Baekje's major castles. Baekje tried to retake the castles again and again, but they all failed. After yielding Baekje, Gwanggaeto the Great fought the Chinese countries and conquered all of the Manchurian fields. The 20th king Jangsu maintained Goguryeu's hegemony by simultaneously interacting with several divided nations of China and moved the capital to Pyongyang in the south in 427. Feeling a sense of crisis, Baekje asked China to attack Goguryeo, but rejected. King Jangsu attacked Baekje first and occupied Baekje's capital. Baekje, which lost its capital, established a new capital in Ungjin. The 6th century belonged to Shilla. Shilla used the royal title of king in the earnest from the 22nd king Jijing, and 23rd king Bopung authorized Buddhism around the 6th century, albeit later, unlike Goguryeo and Baekje, which had already authorized Buddhism in the 4th century. The peak of Shilla's heyday in the 6th century was the reign of the 24th king Jinheung. King Jinheung of Shilla attacked Goguryeo, united with King Seong of Baekje, and occupied the Han River basin. Shilla and Baekje divided Han River basin half and half. King Seong of Baekje was the 26th king of Baekje. He was promoting the revival of Baekje, moving the capital from Ungjin to Sabi. Finally, Baekje restored the Han River basin, the former capital of Baekje, with Shilla. But King Jinheung of Shilla betrayed Baekje and even occupied Baekje's land in the Han River basin. King Seong of Baekje attacked Shilla, but rather died during the battle. King Jinheung of Shilla, who defeated Baekje's power, destroyed Gaya to the south and moved north along the east coast, expanding Shilla's largest territory. The 7th century was a time when the whole of East Asia was swept away by a whirlwind of war. In China, after hundreds of years of division, Sui dynasty unified China. Sui dynasty forced Goguryeo to remain loyal, but Goguryeo rejected. Sui dynasty invaded Goguryeo in 612 with 1.13 million, the largest number of unbroken troops before World War I. However, the Sui dynasty suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Salsu, which fought General Uljimundeok of Goguryeo. The Sui dynasty collapsed because of its unreasonable foreign expedition to Goguryeo, and the Tang dynasty replaced it. The Tang dynasty also invaded Goguryeo in 645 but was defeated at the Battle of Anshi Fortress. Meanwhile, Silla was suffering from persistent attacks from Baekje. Silla asked Goguryeo and Japan for support, but they all rejected. Instead, Silla formed an alliance with the Tang dynasty of China. The Silla-Tang alliance destroyed Baekje in 660 and also destroyed Goguryeo in 668. After the fall of Goguryeo, the Tang dynasty tried to destroy Silla.
실화를 야야 전투 준비하거라. 전군 전투 준비.
But Silla won the Battle of Gibalpo in 676, preventing the Tang dynasty from invading Korean peninsula. Three kingdoms were unified by Silla. It was the first unified dynasty in Korean history. Although Silla unified the three countries, the unified territory only reached the central and southern parts of the old Goguryeo. That didn't mean that the central and northern parts of the old Goguryeo were taken away by China. In 698, Taejoyeong, who was from Goguryeo, gathered Goguryeo refugees and founded Balhae, the country that inherited Goguryeo. Balhae achieved its heyday when it was the 10th king, King Sun, around the 9th century. Balhae's territory was larger than that of Goguryeo. So this period is called the North-South States period because there was a Silla in the south and Balhae in the north. After unification, Silla is called as Unified Silla. The Unified Silla is again divided into the Middle Era and the Later Era. Middle Era was a period of stability that united people from the old Baekje and Goguryeo into the society of Silla based on strong royal authority for about 150 years after unification. The culture of Silla also flourished, making Bulguksa Temple and Seokram Grotto. On the other hand, Later Era was a chaotic period when the royal authority was weakened due to the ongoing dispute over succession to the throne and corrupt aristocrats infested with. The civil war and rebellion continued, and the newly emerging thanes in the local provinces turned against the central government, tearing up the society of Silla. At last, Baekje was revived in 900 and Goguryeo was revived in 901. This period is called the Later Three Kingdoms period. King Gungye of Later Goguryeo lost his public sentiment by engaging in serious tyranny. Eventually, in 918, Wangun staged a coup d'etat, expelling Gungye and becoming king himself. Taejo Wangun named his country Goryeo to inherit Goguryeo and made the capital Gaegyong his base. In 926, the Kitans, who rose in the Liao River, established a country called the Liao dynasty and destroyed Balhae. Balhae's refugees came to Goryeo since Goryeo was the country that inherited Goguryeo like Balhae. Taejo Wangun, the king of Goryeo, accepted all of Balhae's refugees. Meanwhile, in 935, the last king of Silla, King Gyeongsun, who had already lost administrative power as a government, defected to Goryeo. Silla, which had continued for 1,000 years, was destroyed like this. In 936, Goryeo's Taejo Wangun reunited Korea, destroying even the later Baekje. Taejo Wangun's unification of the later three kingdoms was the process of uniting the thanes of each province, which had risen nationwide since the later era of the Silla kingdom. Therefore, Taejo Wangun had to give considerable preference to the thanes. But Gwangjong, the fourth king, kept the thanes in check for strong royal authority. In 958, Gwangjong announced Kwago examination, which was the highest level state examination to recruit ranking officials. The thanes could become bureaucrats without any examination, so Gwangjong tried to cultivate a group of bureaucrats, not the thanes, through Kwago examination. Then Gwangjong had an extreme reign of terror, purging almost all the thanes. Through Gwangjong's ruthless purges of blood, only survived about 40 clans. During the reign of King Seongjong, the sixth king, he reorganized the basic ruling system of Goryeo. The Liao dynasty, founded by the Khitan, invaded Goryeo in 993. The Liao dynasty in the north was at odds with Chinese Song dynasty, but Goryeo had been close to Song dynasty in opposition to had been rejecting the Liao dynasty, which destroyed Parhe. Seohee, a Goryeo diplomat, negotiated with the commander of the Liao dynasty and sent back the Liao armies on the condition that Goryeo would cut off diplomatic relations with the Song dynasty and sign diplomatic relations with the Liao dynasty. Instead, as it was necessary to expand its territory to face the border with the Liao dynasty, Goryeo expanded its territory to the north and built 6 fortresses. This new territory is called 6 garrison settlements east of the river. But as Goryeo continued to interact with the Song dynasty, the Liao dynasty continued its second and third invasions in 1010 and 1018. During the second invasion, King Hyunjong, the 8th king of Goryeo, left the palace and fled far away, and the capital city also fell, but the Goryeo army disturbed the rear of the Liao dynasty in 6 garrison settlements, forcing the Liao dynasty to retreat. During the third invasion, Gangamchan of Goryeo defeated 100,000 Liao dynasty troops in the Battle of Gwiju. In 1107, Goryeo sent 170,000 troops to subjugate the Jurchens, a nomadic tribe that was distributed in Manchuria over the Tumen River. The conquest of Goryeo was a great achievement in its early days, but Goryeo had to return the territory due to Jurchens' continuous protests. There were also merchants of various nationalities coming and going in Goryeo. Arabian merchants introduced Goryeo as Korea or Korea to Western countries, which led the name of Korea was known as Korea. Gradually, as Goryeo entered a stable society, aristocratic system was stagnated. Goryeo's aristocrats monopolized political and economic power. To not share their power, aristocrats formed a closed noble civilian family by marrying themselves or with royalty. Goryeo's military officials, who were severely discriminated against by the abolishment of noble civilian family, rose to a political upheaval in 1170. Military officials ousted the nobles and established a military regime. After that, Goryeo continued its military regime for about 100 years. However, rather than reforming the Goryeo's negative system, the military regime which newly took power enjoyed and followed the benefits of the system. From 1231, Mongolia in the north invaded Goryeo. In the next 30 years, or so until 1260, Mongolia invaded Goryeo 9 times. In 1232, the military regime threatened the king of Goryeo and moved the capital to an island against the Mongolian army, which was vulnerable to water attacks. The Mongols threatened the Goryeo court to come out of Ganghwado Island, but the Goryeo court never came out. To threaten harder, the Mongols violated and looted the whole of Goryeo. Many Goryeo people were damaged and various cultural assets were destroyed. The people of Goryeo gathered on their own to defeat the Mongolian army instead of Goryeo's court. In 1260, Wonjong, the 24th king of Goryeo, personally visited Mongolia and surrendered. Then, after fighting against the military regime for about 10 years, Wonjong left the capital Ganghwado Island and returned to Gaegyong in 1270. In exchange for Goryeo surrender, the Wian dynasty of Mongolia promised not to destroy Goryeo and not to touch the customs of Goryeo. However, the Wian dynasty intervened in Goryeo's internal affairs on every occasion and seized Goryeo's supplies. The 80 years of the Wian dynasty's interference are called the Wian domination. During the Wian domination, Goryeo's nobles, who were resurrected, served in the Wian dynasty and still enjoyed a luxurious life even when Goryeo was exploited. King Gongmin, the 31st king of Goryeo, ended the period of Wian domination by taking advantage of debilitating Wian dynasty. He regained Goryeo's own culture, removed the aristocratic clans that had been attached to the Wian dynasty, and restored the territory taken by the Wian dynasty. However, after losing his beloved wife, King Gongmin lost all the will to reform and became incompetent king. He was eventually killed. Aristocratic clans revived, but Goryeo's military officials, who grew up wiping out Japanese pirates, defeated the aristocratic clans. Chaeyoung, the representative of Goryeo military officials, tried to conquest the Liaodong to find the territory of Goguryeo, but Chaeyoung's subordinate Lee Seong-gae, who knew it was an unreasonable expedition, retreated near the Yalu River and ousted Chaeyoung. After Lee Seong-gae's retreat, Lee Seong-gae joined forces not with aristocrats, but with scholar gentry class who were studying Neo-Confucianism. However, the scholar gentry classes were divided over the agenda of destroying Goryeo and electing Lee Seong-gae as king. The representative of the side who agreed was Jeong Do-jeon, and representative of the side who opposed was Jeong Mung-ju. The two were friends and both were close to Lee Seong-gae. When Lee Seong-gae and Jeong Do-jeon failed to persuade Jeong Mung-ju, Lee Seong-gae's son Lee Ba-won assassinated Jeong Mung-ju at will. After Jeong Mung-ju's death, Goryeo 34th last king, King Gongyang, handed over the royal seal to Lee Seong-gae, and in 1392, Goryeo collapsed. Lee Seong-gae became king, proclaimed the name of the country Joseon, and moved the capital to Hanyang, which is now Seoul. Taejo Lee Seong-gae became the first king of Joseon. Jeong Do-jeon, the right-hand man of Taejo Lee Seong-gae, led the moving capital to Hanyang and designed everything to make Neo-Confucianism the ideology of the Joseon. Jeong Do-jeon pursued a prime minister-oriented political system in which the king remained a symbol and the prime minister oversaw everything in state affairs. Therefore, Jeong Do-jeon supported the youngest son of Taejo Lee Seong-gae as the crown prince, who will succeed the next king. Taejo Lee Seong-gae appointed his 8th youngest son as crown prince, but his 5th son, Lee Ba-won, was greatly dissatisfied. Lee Ba-won thought Joseon could have founded thanks to him by killing Jeong Mung-ju. Dissatisfied with his youngest brother's appointment as crown prince, Lee Ba-won caused the strife of princes, killing Jeong Do-jeon and also his younger brother. And Lee Ba-won enthroned his second brother as the next king for fear of moral criticism if he become king right away. However, the second king, Jeong Jong, did not want the power for the king, so 2 years later, Jeong Jong abdicated to his brother, Lee Ba-won. Lee Ba-won became the third king, Taejong. King Taejong strengthened his royal authority by purging his subjects who were likely to have power, such as his maternal relatives and close aides. Unlike the third king Taejong Lee Ba-won, who established a strong royal authority, his son King Sejong, who was crowned a fourth king, achieved a stable society by pursuing a balanced relationship with his subjects. Sejong the Great, who was also interested in military power, began to conquer the Jurchen on the north and made Joseon's territory into what is now Korea's territory. Sejong the Great, who was also interested in science, liberated Jang Yeongsil, a former slave, and kept Jang Yeongsil by Sejong's side. Jang Yeongsil created various astronomical observation instruments and clocks. Sejong the Great is the most respected king by today's Koreans, and the most important achievement among what he did was the creation of Hangul, the Korean letter. The Chinese characters were used in the past, but it was uncomfortable because Chinese characters didn't fit to Korean as they were for Chinese. Sejong the Great created 28 phonetic characters that anyone could easily learn. The illiteracy rate of the people has decreased sharply. Sejong the Great's creation of Hangul meant that he spread knowledge to the people. The name of the award given to those who worked hard to defeat illiteracy by UNESCO is called UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize. The sixth king of the Joseon dynasty was Danjong, the grandson of Sejong the Great, who was crowned at a young age. Prince Suyang, the second son of Sejong the Great and the uncle of Danjong, rose to a coup and killed his young nephew, then became King Sejong of the seventh king. Since the foundation of Joseon, various political upheaval has continued, and many meritorious ministers had been appointed. The ruling class of Joseon was led by these meritorious ministers based on their granted privileges. These contributors are called the Hungu faction. King Seongjong, the ninth king of Joseon, employed the Sarin faction to check the Hungu faction. At the end of the Goryeo dynasty, the scholar gentry class who refused to participate in the Joseon dynasty did not go to the court, but returned to their local provinces to raise their disciples and continue their academic studies. Siren faction was those disciples who succeeded their academic studies. The ninth king, King Seongjong, had the Siren faction employed mainly in inspection agencies and impeachment agencies to keep the Hungu faction in check, because the high-ranking officials were all dominated by the Hungu faction. However, the Siren faction could not withstand the political veterans of the Hungu faction. Siren faction suffered great damage through 4 massive purges from the 10th to the 13th kings. Still, Siren faction was able to recover quickly because there was a community formed in each local rural society. On the contrary, Hungu faction did not have such a thing, so they assimilated into Siren over time and the Hungu faction disappeared. From the 14th king Seonjo, the Siren faction divided into diverse political factions and competed. During the reign of King Seonjo of the 14th, a huge war broke out in East Asia. It was the Imjin War, which lasted for 7 years from 1592 to 1598. Toyotomi Hideyoshi of Japan invaded Joseon with over 100,000 troops. King Seonjo of Joseon was in such an emergency that he abandoned the capital Hanyang and escaped. Ming Dynasty of China troops entered Joseon to help Joseon fight Japan. It was the East Asian version of the World War. Thanks to the legendary activities of Admiral Lee Sun-shin, who completely took control of the Southern Sea, the tide of war was tilted against Japan. In 1598, when Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in Japan, the Japanese army withdrew all troops and the war ended. But the 7-year war devastated Joseon. After the Imjin War, Gwang Hae-gun, the 15th king, devoted himself to the post-war reconstruction project. The war with Japan was over, but Northeast Asia was still confusing. During Imjin War, as the Chinese Ming army came to Joseon, Chinese Ming's dominance over the Manchuria area was weakened. At this time, Nurhaci united the Jurchens and threatened the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty asked Joseon for support to subdue the Jurchens, but Gwang Hae-gun was reluctant to send troops because it was obvious that the declining Ming dynasty would lose. The court of Joseon pressured Gwang Hae-gun to return the favor to the Ming dynasty, which helped Joseon during the Imjin War. Gwang Hae-gun was forced to send troops. In the Battle of Saruhu in 1619, as expected by the Gwang Hae-gun, the Joseon Ming ally were annihilated by Nurhaci's Jurchens forces. Nevertheless, Gwang Hae-gun secretly showed a friendly gesture to the Jurchens and maintained a good relationship. In 1623, a coup d'etat broke out in Joseon, expelling King Gwang Hae-gun and becoming King Injo of the 16th. Injo, who denied Gwang Hae-gun's regime, engaged in a completely different diplomatic policy from Gwang Hae-gun, antagonizing the later Jin dynasty founded by the Jurchens and strengthening relations with the Ming dynasty. Hong Taiji, who succeeded Nurhaci, renamed his country the Qing dynasty in 1636 and invaded Joseon. This was Byungja War. Injo tried to cross over to Ganghwado Island, like Goryeo, which fought Mongolia in the past, but the Qing army blocked the road and Injo entered Naman-Sansang fortress in the south to resist. After 47 days resistance, Injo finally decided to surrender. He bowed to Hong Taiji and suffered a humiliating defeat. Joseon decided to offer tribute to the Qing dynasty, and after the fall of the Ming dynasty, the Qing dynasty occupied mainland China. Imjin War and Byungja War. History of Joseon is divided early in late Joseon by these two huge wars. In the late Joseon history, struggle between the political party factions became severe. When the factions politic began, only the politic ideology was different and salubrious dispute was made. But factions politic in the late Joseon dynasty turned into an extreme fight with the aim of destroying the other faction party. In this political culture, tragic events happened in the royal family, such as the king killing his wife or the king killing his son. Under the reign of King Yeongjo, the 21st king, and King Jeongjo, the 22nd king, the two kings softened this extreme fight between faction parties by launching a so-called Tangpyeong policy, pursuing a balance of various parties based on strong royal authority. That's why the 18th century of King Yeongjo and King Jeongjo is also called the Renaissance of Joseon. However, after King Jeongjo's death in 1800, Joseon had the darkest period of Sedo politics for 60 years. Sedo politics refers to a form of politics in which the politics of factions ended and one clan controls everything in the country. That clan was of course corrupted, the king's royal authority was weak, and people's livelihoods were destroyed. During this period, the emergence of Western ships made society even more confusing. In 1863, King Gojong, the 26th king of Joseon, was crowned. King Gojong was the collateral line of royal family, as the direct line of the Joseon royal family was cut off. King Gojong was able to become king thanks to his father, Heungseon Daewon-gun. King Gojong became king at the age of 12, so Heungseon Daewon-gun, his father, served as regent. Heungseon Daewon-gun ended the Sedo politics and sought a strong royal authority. Diplomatically, he insisted on a closed diplomatic line, saying that he would not establish diplomatic relations with any Western countries. The regency continued for about 10 years, and now King Gojong has become an adult in his 20s, but Heungseon Daewon-gun did not give power. However, King Gojong's wife, Empress Myeongseong, encouraged Joseon's subjects to pressure Heungseon Daewon-gun, and Heungseon Daewon-gun had to step down because of public opinion. In 1875, Japan forced Joseon to open a port through gunboat diplomacy, just as the United States did to Japan. After Heungseon Daewon's resignation, King Gojong and Empress Myeongseong, who wanted a different diplomat policy from Heungseon Daewon-gun, decided to accept Japan's trade treaty and signed the Treaty of Ganghwa with Japan in 1876, opening a port for the first time. China's Qing dynasty, which felt a sense of crisis over Japan's advance into Joseon, strongly intervened in Joseon, and the Qing meditated Joseon to sign modern treaties with Western countries such as the United States, France, and Russia. Three countries, China Qing, Japan, and Russia, confronted over Joseon. Joseon's court was divided into pro-Qing group and pro-Japan group, with King Gojong and Empress Myeongseong supporting the Qing dynasty. In fact, King Gojong was actually friendly to Russia, but the breath of Empress Myeongseong was stronger than King Gojong. In 1894, a rebellion called Donghak Peasant Revolution broke out in Joseon. The Qing dynasty in Japan sent troops to Joseon in the name of suppressing the Donghak Peasant Revolution, and the first Sino-Japanese War occurred in Joseon. In 1895, Japan won the first Sino-Japanese War. As the Qing dynasty was out in the competition of Joseon, King Gojong and Empress Myeongseong tried to approach Russia. Out of anger, Japan infiltrated the samurai into the palace of Joseon and killed Empress Myeongseong. In 1897, King Gojong changed the name of country to the Korean Empire, and King Gojong became the emperor, not the king. In 1904, the Russo-Japanese War broke out. In 1905, Russia was defeated, and no country could stop Japan from invading Korean Empire. Japan deprived the Korean Empire of diplomatic sovereignty through Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905. Emperor Gojong sent envoys to the Hague Peace Conference to accuse Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905 of injustice, but Western countries showed no interest in Korea's problem, and Japanese interference prevented envoys from attending the conference. In 1907, Japan forcibly deposed Emperor Gojong and established his son Emperor Sunjong as the second emperor. And Japan broke up the army of the Korean Empire. Emperor Sunjong was just scarecrow of Japan. In 1910, Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty was signed. Korean Empire was annexed to Japan and fell into Japan's colony. Korea fell into Japanese colony for 36 years from 1910 to 1945. Japan's colonial rule was divided into three periods: 1910s, 1920s, and 1930s and 40s. In the 1910s, the Japanese deployed military police to suppress colonial Joseon with fearful politics. On March 1, 1919, colonial Koreans staged a large-scale national independence movement. March 1st independence movement was reported worldwide. Nehru of India admired March 1st independence movement of Korea, and in China also developed the May 4th movement under the influence of the March 1st independence movement of Korea. The March 1st independence movement was the most ethnic event for Koreans, to the extent that the Korean government today also stated that Korea would inherit the spirit of the March 1st independence movement. After going through the March 1st independence movement, Japan changed its governance in a conciliatory way from the 1920s, but it was actually deceptive policies to foster pro-Japanese group. Moreover, the economic exploitation of colonial Korea was indescribable. From the 1920s, the independence movement in Korea was actively carried out under the influence of the March 1st independence movement. In colonial Korea's land, various popular movements such as student movements, women's movement, and children's movements were developed. Independence movements have also been developed abroad. In Shanghai, China, the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea was established, and in Manchuria, independent units fought against the Japanese army. They won a great victory over the Japanese military under poor conditions such as the Battle of Cheongsanri. But at the same time, as communism spread, independence activists were also split into two ideologies, communism and nationalism. Japan started the Manchurian Incident in 1931, the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, and the Pacific War in 1941. Amid a whirlwind of war, Japan implemented a policy of completely annihilating the nationality of colonial Korea. The Korean language was banned and they bullied colonial Koreans with forced conscription. The more Japan suppressed colonial Korea, the more intense the fight by the independent units outside the country. On August 15, 1945, Japan, which was hit by an atomic bomb, declared an unconditional surrender and Korea was also liberated. In August 1945, the Soviet army came down to 38 degrees latitude, and in September 1945, the US military entered South Korea. Based on 38 degrees latitude, the Soviet military government was established above 38th parallel, and the US military government was established under 38th parallel. Right after liberation, the communist camp in Korea was largely composed of three factions: domestic, Soviet, and Chinese. Kim Il-sung didn't belong anywhere. He once served in the Soviet army. The Soviets tried to raise Kim Il-sung, who didn't have a faction, and use him as their chess piece. The United States and Soviet Union had sought directions to establish Korea's own government on several occasions, but the US states and the Soviet Union had not reached an agreement in the international situation that has entered the Cold War. Koreans were also extremely divided according to their ideology. In the end, the UN decided to form a separate government between South and North Korea. On August 15, 1948, the current South Korean government was established under the 38th parallel to mark the third anniversary of liberation. The first president was Ri Sung-man. And about a month later, on September 9, 1948, above the 38th parallel, the current North Korea was also established. Korea was finally divided by the 38th parallel. On June 25, 1950, the North Korea, which received supplies from the Soviet, invaded South Korea. Korean War broke out. 2 days later, on the 27th, US President Truman appointed Douglas MacArthur of the GHQ's Supreme Command in Japan as the commander of the UN forces. UN forces consisting of armies from 16 countries were put into the Korean War. But in the meantime, South Korea had already taken over the capital, Seoul. The UN forces were deployed, but they looked so down on the North Korean military in the early days that they continued to be pushed back to the Nakdonggang River defense line in the southeast of the Korean peninsula. Tough battles continued the Nakdonggang River defense line. In September 1950, Douglas MacArthur succeeded Operation Chromite, Incheon landing operation, through a 1/5,000 chance, turning the tide at once. The UN forces and South Korean armies took back all the territory south of the 38th parallel that was taken and went north across the 38th parallel. North Korea's capital, Pyongyang, was captured, and when the UN forces moved further north to the Yalu River and Tumun River, the Chinese military intervened. The Chinese military's strategy and tactics of fighting in an abnormal way were very embarrassing for the US military, which had been fighting in a standard way. Both the UN forces and the South Korean armies had to retreat, and in the process, the Battle of Jangjinho, one of the worst winter battles in the history of human war, took place. The front then became entrenched on the eastern front. The eastern part of Korea has a series of rugged mountains, so the battles on the eastern front, which were fixed from this time until the end of the war, are called the mountain warfare. As Douglas MacArthur continued to compete with President Truman, the commander-in-chief of the UN was replaced by Ridgway. Ridgway started to discuss an armistice with the Soviet and China. Ceasefire talks were held in earnest, but the US and the Soviet Union have failed to reach an agreement on the repatriation of prisoners of war, which had delayed the ceasefire talks. It turned out that Stalin of the Soviet Union went to the ceasefire talks to take time out of the US, not paying attention to European affairs. In March 1953, after Stalin's death, the ceasefire talks were held in a swift manner. The US appeased South Korean President Lee Seung-man, who did not want an armistice, by signing a mutual defense treaty and promising economic aid. All wars were halted as of 10 p.m. on July 27, 1953. According to the armistice agreement, the border between two Koreas was set not to the 38th parallel, but to the area occupied by the troops of both sides, based on the moment the armistice declaration was made. That's why the current border between two Koreas is called the military demarcation line, and the demilitarized zone was also established. After the Korean War, President Lee Seung-man began his dictatorship through rigged elections. Koreans who longed for democracy started the April 19 Revolution in 1960, and President Lee Seung-man stepped down. But in 1961, Major General Park Chung-hee of the military launched a 5.16 coup and seized power. 2 years later, in 1963, Park Chung-hee took office as president. Park Chung-hee began military dictatorship in the 60s and 70s for 18 years. He violated human rights by suppressing people who aspired to democratization with torture. In 1972, President Park Chung-hee had the absolute power as a de facto lifetime president by revising the constitution named Eugene Constitution. Otherwise, Park Chung-hee achieved high economic growth by promoting massive industrialization during his 18 years in power. Park Chung-hee fostered the light industry in the 60s and the heavy chemical industry in the 70s. In the meantime, he had earned a lot of foreign currency through the dispatch of troops to the Vietnam War, the dispatch of miners to West Germany, and the Korean-Japan Treaty. It is called the miracle on the Han River for raising Korea to the level of developing countries in a very short time, which seemed like Korea could never recover after the war. So the evaluation of President Park Chung-hee is divided into poles nowadays. He gets a negative evaluation politically, but he gets a positive evaluation economically. However, in the process of economic growth, there were many side effects such as poor human rights of workers. It was Park Chung-hee's military dictatorship that seemed unlikely to end forever, but in 1979, President Park Chung-hee was assassinated by his close aide. With the Park Chung-hee's death, the people hoped for the advent of democracy, called the Seoul Spring, but Chun Doo-hwan, the military's chief, investigating Park Chung-hee's perpetrators, rebelled again on December 12, 1979 and seized power. In May 1980, Chun Doo-hwan turned Gwangju, campaigning for democratization, into a sea of fire and became president with a reign of terror. Chun Doo-hwan was much more vicious than Park Chung-hee. Chun Doo-hwan also sought long-term power based on the presidential indirect election system as a principle, but in June 1987, a nationwide democratic uprising demanding a direct presidential election broke out, and Chun Doo-hwan promised to accept a direct election system, eventually establishing democracy in Korea. With the 1988 Seoul Olympics, Korea became widely known to the world, and since then, Korea has grown economically. However, the 1997 IMF financial crisis directly hit the economy and collapsed. Business went bankrupt one after another. In 1998, Kim Dae-jung, a symbol of democratization, was elected president. He overcame the IMF financial crisis and ended the IMF management system in 2001. In 2000, President Kim Dae-jung met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-il and held a first inter-Korean summit. For this achievement, President Kim Dae-jung won the Nobel Peace Prize. Today, South Korea has succeeded in promoting various cultural industries globally. Let's look at the history of the North Korea. The Korean War was also used as a tool for Kim Il-sung to remove his political opponents. Kim Il-sung removed his political opponents by holding them responsible for the defeat of the war, and in 1956, Kim Il-sung completed the dictatorship by purging all the factions, domestic, Chinese, and Soviet Union factions. In 1972, Kim Il-sung created a new constitution based on the so-called Juche ideal, also called Kim Il-sungism, and in North Korea, he was virtually a king. In the 1980s, as Kim Il-sung's body became increasingly frail, his son Kim Jong-il was almost in charge of real politics. When Kim Il-sung died of heart disease in 1994, his son Kim Jong-il took over. After succession, Kim Jong-il pushed for economic policy, but the result was a disaster. Kim Jong-il wrapped up his failed economic policy as a march of suffering, but from 1994 to 1999, 1 million people died in hunger. Today's poverty in North Korea is the aftermath of these economic policy failures. Kim Jong-il, whose power was jeopardized by economic failure, expanded his military by starting to build nuclear weapons, making North Korea an intense military state. When Kim Jong-il died in 2011, his son Kim Jong-un inherited the power, and Kim Jong-un strengthened his dictatorship by purging his brothers and relatives who were obstructed by power. Kim Jong-un wants to be authorized globally for North Korea's system and its power. Do you think that Korea can be unified?